On this episode of Doing the Most, we're making a pineapple mead that our YouTube subscribers voted for.
Homemade brews and various how-tos, everything from mead to roast, bake creation, fermentation, inebriation, doing the most.
This 100% juice pineapple mead started its life in cans. We went down to the Chef Supply store in South Oklahoma City and picked up a bunch of cans of Dole 100% pineapple juice. It's a lot. The ingredients for this mead are 12 pounds of honey, pineapple juice to 5 gallons, QA23 yeast, 2 grams of citric acid, 2 grams of wine tannin, 4 ounces of dark oak for 1 month, and 2 pounds of honey to back sweeten. We are also using an aroma enzyme called Rapidase Revelation. QA23 was recommended to me by a mead making colleague because it's a great match for tropical fruits like pineapple because of all the fruity notes that are created and maintained by the yeast. I'm rehydrating our yeast with Go Firm. This is going to be 6 grams of Go Firm Protect and a little bit of bottled non-chlorinated water to rehydrate that QA23 yeast. Just give that a good old shake and make sure it's nice and combined so that way the yeast can rehydrate while we open all these cans of juice and mix up our must. We're also going to be using a modified nutrient schedule with Fermaid O. We need 12 pounds of honey for this recipe, which is the equivalent of a gallon of honey, and I'll just trickle that out of this 5-gallon bucket. Such a beautiful sight. If you subtract the weight of the bucket, this comes out right to just over 12 pounds of honey. And now to open all these cans, Anna stepped in to help. She opened and I poured. And now, of note, this pineapple juice has a lot of pulp in the bottom of the can, so make sure you really shake those up if you're going to replicate this recipe. You want to make sure that you get everything out of the can. You paid for it after all. And stir to combine your honey with your juice. Then that goes up to the bench. And I decided to rack this off into a carboy once it was mixed up because I wanted to be able to watch what it looked like while it ferments and also make sure that we didn't go over our 5 gallons. I never really trust the markings on the sides of these buckets, and I really need to just measure and mark my own markings on them. Now, let's take a quick pause. Do you see that little mark there? Yeah, I didn't, and that's a hairline fracture in the bottom of my carboy, which we'll get to in a little bit. And so let's finish racking that off and top up with a little bit more pineapple juice. Make sure to stir really well so it's all nice and incorporated in there. And take a hydrometer reading. Now you can't really see this here, but that hydrometer reads 1.14 for a potential ABV of around 18%. QA23 is supposed to have an alcohol tolerance of around 16%. So we heft that up onto the bench and pull out our trusty scale again because we've got some very minute measuring to do. The same mead maker colleague who recommended QA23 sent me this very small packet of Rapidase Revelation. It's an enzyme that's supposed to generate incredible tropical fruity aromas in tropical meads. And I guess it's sort of experimental and kind of only available on the commercial scale, but he was happy to send me a little bit to experiment with and feature in this video. Big thanks to him. After reading some instructions and doing some math and checking with this colleague, I determined that 0.165 grams, that's 0.165 grams, was enough for the whole 5-gallon batch. And as mentioned, we're also adding some tannin to this. We're gonna put in 2 grams of powdered wine tannin. And I came to this amount after quite a bit of internet research, indicating that pineapple juice is low in tannin. And then our hydrated yeast goes in, and we're ready to ferment. I'm going to start out by fermenting this open with a paper towel twist tied onto the top of the carboy. This is going to let it breathe a little bit and prevent any blow-off issues if I was using a more traditional style of airlock. 24 hours later and similarly dressed, it's time to add a couple of other things. We're starting with that fermento I mentioned, 6 grams to start off with, and pectic enzyme by the manufacturer's instructions, which ended up being a few grams. All that goes in with some non-chlorinated and sterile water. Shake it up, pour it in. Then one day after work, I was about to add nutrient to the mead, and I heard a clanking sound. Upon further inspection, that hairline fracture had started to open up. So in an emergent panic, I had to rack this off, and all I had available was a brewing bucket. The entire time this was racking, I was terrified that the bottom was gonna blow out of this thing. But fortunately, I got it all off. And when I set the carboy down in recycling, the bottom blew out. And I'm incredibly happy that I did not have 5 gallons of mead in there when it happened, particularly because this was very early on in fermentation and would have been quite the mess to clean up. So at that point, I added another round of fermento. A few days later, when I opened it up to add more nutrient, it had this beautiful spiral on top that had naturally developed. I posted on Reddit, and an artistic Redditor made this awesome pineapple logo out of it that will eventually find its way onto my labels. Big shout out for that. This got 4 editions of 6 grams each of fermento. I did them around every quarter the way through primary fermentation. The last one being added when it was at 1.02 on the hydrometer, because I just knew it was gonna need a little oomph to get across the finish line. And a few days after that, I cracked it open to take a hydrometer reading and see if we had finished dry. Sure enough, it did. So it was time to get this off the yeast cake and into a carboy. Since I had an extra can of pineapple juice left over, I topped it up with a little bit of that so we can get a little bit more of that subtle pineapple in secondary. And then a few days later, it was clear that the yeast were done. It had started to drop clear and there was quite a bit of pulp and lees at the bottom, so it was time to get it into a different carboy and get it back sweetened. And I felt like the best way to do that was to rack it into a new carboy and add 2 pounds of honey. At this point, I also added sparkaloid. That's about 1 tablespoon in a boiling hot cup of water, and that will help it clear. Stir, stir, stir. And while I had a little bit in the racking tube, I decided to take a taste. It was very pronounced, definitely some alcohol heat on the nose, some pineapple flavor in the background, and tart, but kind of not as tart as I was expecting. So I knew I was going to make a couple of amendments to it after it had some time to sit and mellow and marry. A few weeks later, I tasted it again, and I knew it was going to need some rebalancing. So I added 2 grams of citric acid, and 4 ounces of dark toasted oak that I had boiled for 5 minutes and drained and allowed to cool. I let it sit on that dark toasted oak for 4 weeks. And then we bottled it up on a live stream, so that way you could see the conclusion of this project. We tasted it on the stream and it had mellowed considerably from the first time that I had tried it, and the pineapple was really starting to come through. That edge on the nose had faded and was being replaced with more fruity aromatics that kind of really remind you of that fresh, like bright yellow pineapple flavor. I know this one's going to take several months to kind of get to know itself in the bottle, so we'll probably be doing a tasting on this in 6 to 8 months, or maybe even just a year, to really let it kind of do its thing. It is about 17% alcohol even after dilution, and so it's a boozy beverage, and it's just gonna need a little bit of time to come into its own. Even having used that nutrient schedule, there's just so much going on in that bottle, and I really want it to be able to shine. As always, thank you for watching. What tropical fruits do you brew with? I'd love to see some recommendations in the comments. You can find us on Instagram and Pinterest at doingthemostok, and our website is doingthemost.org. Until next time, keep doing the most.